And we continue learning Dirshu Mishnah Brura. We're middle of the halachas of the Seudah. Most particularly, we're middle of discussing the halachas of Yayin. We finished off in the previous year discussing the credible entity, how Yayin is the roish of all the mashkin, how the bracha of Yayin is not pattered by Amaitzi, but on the same vein, it patters all liquids. Says the Machaber in Sif Gimel, Kufsa Ayin Dalid, Sif Gimel, Amein Lo Ela Kais Ech. If one only has one cup, he should save it for after the meal and bench with that kais. Says the Mishnah Brura Sivkatan, hey, manichai, even according to the opinion that holds you do not need a kais for benching, mikol makaim. Nevertheless, there's a higher level. There's a mitzvah in amochar to bench on a kais. If you're thirsty, which of course was common in their world, that wine was the drink. So if you don't have other drinks, then says Mr. Bura, it's better to drink prior. Why? Just because you're thirsty? No. To fulfill the words of the Mordechai Shuva B'Ramah Kaman Simkuf Sadizayin, which is what? She'soivik she'toiv lishtais eino echayim min ha'toyer levarach b'chesmaz and ad she'yisht. An important sheet of the Mordechai says the Mordechai one is only obligated to bench midda oraisa if he does not need to drink. If one is thirsty, then he does not have a din b'chesmaz midda oraisa. So says Mr. Brewer, simple cheshbon. To bench alakais is a mitzvah min amofchar, is a higher level. To be thirsty when you bench, according to the Mordechai, makes it not daraisa. So says Mr. Brewer, if all you have is wine, then you should utilize it and drink it so that you're not thirsty when you bench. We continue with Sifdalit, says the Machaber Mkava Lishtais of Neam Hazi. So it was Kaiveya. One had a kvias, a set form of drinking before benching. Then you don't need to make a bracha on the wine during the meal. Means before the meal. So let's say someone's having a wine party. Exactly what it means, a wine party, is not so simple, but it's something along the lines that wine was the drink. So just like maybe a few friends would sit around and have a cup of coffee, they would do that with wine. So if you have a bunch of people sitting and just drinking wine, you're kaiveya to drink wine, and then you go straight into your Seudah. Then you do not need to make tagafin during the meal. The yain shavnei amazain, because the wine that is had before the meal continues the chaber. Poitra is patters up the wine during the meal. And similarly, yain shel kiddush poitra yain shabseich amazain. The wine of kiddush patters off the wine during the meal. Similarly, if one is mavdil, so makes avdallah, patters the wine, which of course, this we know. This is the halacha that we have every week. We make kiddush. And then, of course, even if you have wine during the meal, it is pattered. The Yesh Aimrim continues Mishmur quoting Shita Sataisis. She'ein berachas yayin havdalah poiter elam kein natal yadav koidim havdalah. Says the Mechaber, 1 second. When it comes to Havdalah, it's not so simple. And we all can conjure up why. Because Havdalah is not the beginning of your Seudah. So says the Mechaber, maybe it's only if you washed your hands prior to Havdalah. Hilkach, therefore, continues the Mechaber, quoting the Beis Yosef, or he is the Beis Yosef, continuing. Hamavdil, if you made Havdalah before washing your hands, then you should have in mind not to pater the wine you're going to drink during the meal afterwards. Then consideration that it has sif zayin shebtoy chasuda. But the average kivin kach pater yain shel chasuda will work. The suffix brachas derabanan lahakel. So let's continue with Mishnah Brura Sivkat and Vav, who explains that if you're covered to drink wine before the meal, then it is you do not need to make a new bracha on the wine during the meal. Says the Mishnah Brura, Kasa achrein de lav davka kava, lav davka of your kava. If you made a kvias, if you set yourself to drink wine, say the achreinim. So maybe a case like this would be if, Kiddush is going to be difficult because we already learned that Kiddush is going to pater for whatever reason, one is drinking some wine on a Tuesday evening, he has a glass of wine, and then he goes into a meal. So if he knows he's going to eat, he should have in mind that the wine should pater up that which he's drinking during the meal, and then it will work. So just to point out an important shartzin over here, Sivkotin Yud Gimel says that the Graz says the Makom Sheregilim Lishtais in a place that it is common to drink yain b'toch hasuda. Afilu mistama amrina kilo yidait lazeh. So the Graz says this is what you normally have wine during a meal. Then this is not a concern because that stam das will work even in this case. Shebsei Chasuda Sivkotin Zayin continues the Mishnah Berurah, Sivzei Chamazin, excuse me. And the same thing is true. The Paiter Nami Yain Shalachar Hamazin. It paters up wine after a meal. Koidim Birchas Hamazin, before you bench. Shalachar Hamazin, Koidim Birchas Hamazin, which again, what does that mean? After the meal, before you bench. So Mishnah Berurah explains that Makav Shergil Lishtay Yain Achar Gemar Chilasan. Again, wine was the drink, so sometimes after a Suda, they would just sit down and they would just have a wine course. Let's say you didn't have wine before the meal. And therefore, when you have a glass of wine during the meal, of course, we make a brach. Then if you're having wine after the meal, you have to make a bracha. Why? The wine during a Suda is just to satiate. It's not important enough to pater up the wine that comes after the meal, which has come for enjoyment. Ayin basis because of the mutzame machas achilasa. If you're thirsty, I feel nishtaz man harbe achar Suda, even if it's much after the meal. If you're drinking it for satiation, for thirst, then it's like wine during the meal. The balishus amaychel. And you would not need a bracha. So it's only referring to a case, says the Mishnah Berurah, the one has like a wine course, the one is sitting around after the Suda, just enjoying wine for its own purpose. That's when the original bracha will not pater. Says the Mishnah Berurah, which of course is what we do, that we have the bread on the table. We're considered to be part of a bread meal until we bench. Everything is considered during the meal. Of course, all the wine will be patered. Says the Mishnah Berurah, don't say davka wine that is before a meal, which is a chashiv as your keveya to drink. Why you drink the wine to open up your insides? Maybe only that. Yayin is that pots up the wine during the meal. Yayin kiddush. But what about the wine of Kiddush? That you're not drinking to open up your insides. You're not drinking to increase your appetite. Why are you drinking it? Because you have a mitzvah of Kiddush. Maybe you would think it doesn't pater. Kamashlan says the Mishnah Berurah, depaiter. Nearly posh, continues Mishnah Berurah. You have to have das. Lahedya says Mishnah Berurah, even for after Kiddush wine. But again, as we'll see the Dirshu in a moment, the Mishnah Berurah tells us why. Because they weren't regular to drink. But if someone keeps the wine, the grape juice on the table, and it is normal for him to drink, then of course it would be pater. This is just Mishnah Berurah saying, since it's not normal, therefore it would not pater. Shebzei Chamazin, Sivkot and Tazu, or Dijlach Chamazin. V'chein Hamavdil, Sivkot and Yod. Then we go into Havdalah. Ratzalaim, what does this mean, says the Mishnah Berurah? Af al gav. Havdalah einoi sheyach klal suda k'may kiddush. Havdalah has nothing to do with the upcoming suda. If you lach, even the Havdalah al shochat tzitla maiso is on the table, or Ratzalaim, or sheichan azul suda. Sheyach al suda. Omari kanal sheyavnei delicious gamitach suda. You had in mind to drink also during the meal. She'ein berach zayin sivkot in Yod Aleph atam kanal. Deino sheichel lesuda k'may kiddush she'eino yela b'makayim suda. Valkena therefore svir la yisha imrim tebi'inan al kopanim shitol yadav lesuda mit chila. That you need to wash your hands first. That's considered for sure the beginning of the Suda. Yayin Havdalah continues the Mishnah Brus of cut in your base. Because again, like we explained, the wine of Avdal is not part of the meal. As we've explained, that does work. And that's why at the beginning of the sif we didn't mention this whole entity of Natila. Only over here we're having wine of Havdalah, then we're having a Suda, and the two are be'etzem no shaykhis. That's when we're saying to Natal Yadav Simkatin, you give wash your hands first. Lavdavka. For then Mukava Atzil Suda al Shulchan, same thing if you have Kaveya on the Shulchan. Chalik Olav, V'chein Masha B'Agra. The Mishmur is not really clear how he's paskening over here. Let's quickly see Shartzi and Chaf Aleph, which says a little bit like what is the psak over your cup in Atila Sidayim. Says the Rais Magaravam who steers the Rehat Taisis. Kmoshbir Shbachs Shekalain Sham. Gra cause the Emes Das Taisis Kedas a Rosh. The Imkain Ain't Shamakam L'Chidushai. So says the Gain. Tais is like a Rosh, and therefore there's perhaps no makam for his chiddush, and we'll leave this at that. Kaidim Avdal Sivkatin Yudal says Mishabura. Vim Taimer Hechashari Lahafsik Vavdal Ben Til Stam Lamaiti. How can you be mafsik? You washed your hands, so how can you be mafsik Til Stam Lahamaiti? Yesh Laimar. What can we explain? Says the Magen Avraham the Maimon Mordechai. The law you have Yesachadaz Kim Shadai Lechu. Your task is to eat. Vein Rashi Lechu Bli Avdallah, and you need to have Avdallah. Of course, that would be ulcer. So what you should do is have in mind, make the bracha achrayna on this kais, and then go straight into the Suda. Let's look at the Dirshu over here. The Dirshu says, where are we? Here we go. Okay, first of all, Dirshu number 15 points out, which again is going to be relevant because we're going to say that our world is going to be a world as if we have intent and we do have wine during the meal. Let's say you have a long time to end the meal and then you drink the wine because you're thirsty. Again, says the Chazon Ish that if you didn't bench, it's all considered part of the meal. Now, what about Kiddush? It's called Iker LaMitzvah. The Tam says the Shulchan Aruch and Reish Ayin Beis says Dirshu note number 16. Kivishai Kiddush Makam Sudu Nechshav Ki. Shartzian adds on, according to this, if you make Kiddush before you wash your hands, like we do, even one who already was Kiddush in shul, now he's not making Kiddush only for people in his house, a beautiful case. So why are you making Kiddush now mamish for the mitzvah? Says the Dirshu within note 16, says the Shevet HaLevi, it's regular Kiddush, and therefore Pater is all the yain, all the wine during the meal, and we don't say that he's only drinking for the mitzvah, nothing else. Whereas, interestingly enough, says Rishon Zalman, that in this case, you should have in mind to be mekayim the mitzvah yayin, and then it's titkasher the two together. So Shlomo Zalman is saying there's a bit of a kavana one should add on lechatzchila. You shouldn't just be making kiddush for your bnei beis for the household, but rather you should have in mind that you want this to make your kiddush bakam suda, and thereby connected to the Suda itself. Dirshu number 17, which comments on the Mishnah Berurah that says that nowadays we don't generally have wine, and therefore the wine during the meal is not exempt. Says the Dirshu, however, if one could afford, we'll see in Tavkov Chavtes, on Shabbos and Yantav, that's the right thing. And therefore, Reish Sadi Alvi said, similarly, Reish Nunvi says, you should be Marbe Suda Shabbos, Basar B'Yamik Denois. And that's why, if one does, then it will be included. And therefore, you're not going to have to make a bracha. Havdalah is not part of the Suda. Let's say you can actually make Havdalah on the table itself. So we'll see that on Reish Sadi Tes. If you're eating in that meal, then it's going to work. And the case that this would be relevant is like Rav Chaim Kanievsky, who made Havdalah, and then they cleared away Havdalah, they put on a new tablecloth, and boom, they have Malava Malka right then. So let's say that's what you're doing, and during the Malava Malka, you want to drink wine. Would the wine that you just drank pater up the wine during the meal? That would be a case that this is relevant. And with that, we will With that, we will stop and we will pick it up from Sif Hay in the next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.